Have you ever wanted to watch a movie, but looked at its rating and thought, how could that be R? Or perhaps, why in the world did they add those things? Its only purpose was to boost its rating. Well, believe it or not, there was a time in film history when these thoughts would never have occurred to anyone. That's right, what were films like before the MPAA, Motion Picture Association of America, instituted its current film rating system? Before 1930, there was no such thing as film ratings. From the time a script was written to when it was finally released on the big screen, there was no accountability for the film's content. The audience could literally expect anything to be shown. In 1927, Hollywood had Will Hays, a Presbyterian elder, draft a document called the Motion Picture Production Code of 1930, commonly referred to as the Hays Code. This single document is what first started guiding film content until it was replaced by the MPAA rating system in 1968. This little-known piece of film history is what I will be informing you all about today, the Hays Code and what it teaches. In the next several minutes, we will look at what the Hays Code is, the history of the Hays Code, why it was enacted and later replaced, and finally, we will ask the question, what would happen if we still have the Hays Code instead of MPAA ratings? So without further ado, what exactly is the Hays Code? The best way to explain would be to quote from the document itself. Its preamble states, quote, "Motion picture producers recognize the high trust and confidence which have been placed on them by the people of the world and which have made motion picture a universal form of entertainment. They recognize their responsibility to the public because of this trust and because art and entertainment are important influences on the life of a nation. Hence, they realize that the motion picture within its own field of entertainment may be directly responsible to spiritual or moral progress, for higher types of social life, and for much correct thinking," end quote. Following this are three general principles. Quote, 1. No picture shall be produced that will lower the moral standards of those that see it. Hence, the sympathy of the audience should never be thrown towards a sign of crime, wrongdoing, evil, or sin. 2. Correct standards of life, subject only to the requirements of drama and entertainment, shall be presented. 3. Law, natural or human, shall not be ridiculed, nor shall sympathy be created for its violation." End quote. Next, the Hays Code lists several things that films were not allowed to show. Among many other things, murder and revenge were to be shown as wrong, quote, "methods of crime should not be explicitly presented," end quote. Nudity, adultery, rape, even childbirth, obscenity, and profanity are all forbidden. It also states things like, quote, "ministers of religion should not be used as comic characters or as villains. The treatment of bedrooms should be governed by good taste and decency, and the use of the flag should be consistently respectful." Could you imagine every single major film studio signing a document like this today? Because in 1930, they did. Now, the Hays Code directly affected the films made during its time. Take, for one example, Gone with the Wind, details provided by TV Tropes. First, consider Rhett Butler's famous exit line. According to the Hays Code, movies were not allowed to use the D word. However, director David Selznick convinced the MPAA that it was fine because it was very mild and was in the book. Eventually, it was allowed to pass, but only after Selznick paid a $5,000 fine to keep it in. In addition, movies were not allowed to show anyone pregnant or giving birth. To comply with this, Scarlett and Melanie are only ever mentioned, never explicitly shown, as being pregnant. Also, during Melanie's birth, all that is really shown is early labor, and that is just shadows, and then it cuts to when the baby is out. Next, does not show any graphic violence. When Scarlett is told to go help with the amputation, literally all that we are shown are the shadows on the wall. These are only a few examples of what they did to comply with the Hays Code. Now, let's move on and examine the history of the Hays Code. First, we must understand the historical backdrop. The films in the 1910s and 20s were marked by graphic violence, blatant sexuality, and, as sound started occurring, heavy profanity. But this all came to a head in 1915, when the Supreme Court ruled in Mutual Film Corporation v. Industrial Commission of Ohio that the right to free speech did not extend to films. They said that films, quote, "may be used for evil, and for this reason we cannot regard the censorship of movies as beyond the power of government," end quote. This established that each individual state could create their own censorship agencies for film. It wasn't until the 1920s that it finally struck Hollywood that the federal government could now just walk into Hollywood and create their own federal censorship program. This is when they called in Will Hayes and created the MPAA to act as their own private censorship agency. In 1927, Hayes got a group of men together to draft the official list of what could and could not be shown in films. By 1930, the Hayes Code was finalized and enacted. However, it was not actively enforced until 1934. Now, things were going really well in Hollywood during the 30s and 40s. It is interesting to note that it was during this time that the golden age of Hollywood occurred. But by the late 40s, directors started pushing the envelope more, and things started turning back to how they had been pre-code. In 1951, the Hayes Code was revised to be even stricter, and this helped pull films back on track. You must remember now, the Hayes Code was written by Hollywood and signed by every major film studio in America. Thus, it only applied to films made in the United States. European films, on the other hand, were just as immoral as American films had been pre-code. In 1952, a European film was censored by the state of New York, but the director appealed the censorship all the way to the Supreme Court, where they ruled in Joseph Bernstein Incorporation v. Wilson that the films did comply for First Amendment free speech rights and thus could not be censored, thus overturning its 1915 ruling. While this technically only applied to state governments and the federal government, it still majorly weakened the power of the Hayes Code. Now, it was common for a film to be released without obtaining the MPAA seal of approval. By 1959, some films even contained everything that they had contained pre-code. By the mid-60s, no one really cared what the Hayes Code said. After all, how they saw it, not everything in films was black and white anymore. Eventually, people realized that the Hayes Code had absolutely no power left, so it was officially abandoned in 1968 and replaced with the MPAA rating system. The change was essentially one of stating, you were previously not allowed to have these things in your film, now you just have to warn people beforehand. Now, let us ask the question, what would films be like if we still had the Hayes Code in place today? In a short answer, I don't think anything would be different. Honestly, fewer than half of the films made today with major editing could actually pass the Hayes Code. But the same was happening in the 50s and 60s. I think that if the Hayes Code was enacted today, we may have clean films for a few years, but no one would really care. Things would return to normal soon afterwards. Why? Because the very heart of viewers and filmmakers today are corrupt. Thus, they were just as corrupt as they were 100 years ago. Jeremiah 17:9 states, quote, "The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it?" End quote. The problem was and is not that films do not conform with what God calls right and wrong, but that filmmakers and viewers are sinful, thus they do not want to obey God's laws. They enjoy perversity. Not only are films not seen as black and white anymore, but in a few weeks, we'll even have 50 Shades of Grey. What we need to make the film industry moral is not a list of do's and don'ts, but a change of heart. A change which only God can give. A change to the point that people will no longer enjoy what he calls evil, but will love what glorifies him. Maybe, just maybe, if this could be accomplished, we might be able to have a second golden age of Hollywood. In conclusion, we've seen that the Hayes Code teaches us a very important lesson. We as humans can create a system that we see as perfect. But if God is not with us, changing the hearts and minds of people, then our perfect system will fail every